A cruel man shaved the head of a young black girl, and seconds later, her father, the mafia boss, arrived. It started in the hallway of a private school lined with glass trophies and whitewashed portraits of founders who built empires on silence. The building echoed with the hollow sound of privilege, a place where excellence was praised, but only if it came in the right skin. She was 14, proud, brilliant, soft-spoken, but unafraid to speak truth when it mattered. And what she said that day in class wasn't even loud. It was simply true. A poetry showcase had asked students to perform pieces about American heritage. Most recited verses about freedom, flags, and fall leaves. She stood up and told a story about chains, about erasure, about how she opened her textbook and saw heroes who looked nothing like her, about how her hair was called unprofessional, about how her voice was too much in rooms that were too quiet when injustice happened. The room froze. Not because she screamed, but because she didn't. She was calm, surgical, cutting through comfort with every carefully chosen word. The applause was slow. Then came the smirks, the uncomfortable shuffles. And in the back of the room, 3 adult security contractors exchanged looks, men twice her age, who wore earpieces but carried no intention of protecting anyone like her. One of them muttered, another loud little victim. They didn't clap. They didn't speak. They waited. It happened 2 days later. She was alone in the hallway, heading toward the gym for after-school poetry club. Her notebook was clutched to her chest. Her hair, a beautiful cloud of tight coils, bounced with each step. That's when she felt the grip. Too tight. Too strong. She dropped her notebook. The pages spilled like feathers. One of the men had her by the arm. Another blocked the end of the hallway. The third held something in his hand, black, buzzing, electric. And he said, smiling, let's help you fit into the school a little better. She tried to twist away, to scream, but the hallway was empty. The teachers had left early. The cameras, she would later find out, were coincidentally offline. And the man behind her pushed her to the ground as her body trembled with panic and disbelief. She didn't cry out, not yet. Not until she heard the first lock of her hair being taken. The buzzing sound filled the corridor. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted. Her fists clenched into the tile. And then came the laughter. Not from students. From grown men. Paid professionals. Hired by the school for safety. But not hers. You don't get to act all woke and powerful and still walk around like some queen. One of them sneered as the clippers dug cruel lines through her crown. You're just a kid. You need to learn your place. Tears welled up, not just from the violation, but from the helplessness. From the way they stripped her identity, her pride, her voice. They didn't just take her hair. They took her dignity. One of them crouched beside her and whispered, next time you want to talk about history, remember who writes it. She curled into herself on the cold floor, fists still clenched, scalp raw, soul shaken. A phone captured it all. Another man laughed, let's see how many likes this gets. But in that silence that followed, just for a second, they didn't realize someone had already made a call. He wasn't supposed to be there. But he was. The SUVs pulled up so fast the wind slapped the flags outside the school building. The wheels screeched. Doors flung open. Suits poured out. Not government men. Not police. They moved like shadows, fast and calculated. And in their center walked a man whose very presence made oxygen feel heavier. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He just walked straight down that hallway until he saw his daughter on the floor, her hair in patches, her body trembling, and 3 grown men standing above her, suddenly frozen in place. He tilted his head slowly. One glance was enough. The next 10 seconds were a blur. The men didn't even resist, maybe because they knew. Maybe because somewhere in the back of their minds, they recognized who they had touched. Or maybe it was just fear. Not of what he would do, but of what he could do. He didn't touch them. He didn't need to. Instead, he knelt beside his daughter and said only one sentence. Look at me. Her eyes, swollen with tears, met his. And he said, nobody ever takes your crown. They only remind you how tightly it's sewn to your soul. And then he stood, turned, and calmly said to one of his men, "Get the footage, get the names, and get the paperwork ready." By that evening, every file connected to those men had been opened. Their records, ugly and full of things previously overlooked, were laid bare. Backgrounds traced. Phone records pulled. They were arrested not for what they did that day, but for what they had done before. It was all there. The violence, the connections, the corruption, the hate. But that wasn't the end. Because a month later, she stood on a stage, her scalp still healing, her curls just beginning to return. But her voice? Unshaken, stronger, sharper. And as the spotlight hit her face, she looked out into a crowd of hundreds and said, "They tried to take something from me, but all they did was hand me the mic." A standing ovation erupted. But behind that spotlight, behind the stage, there was more. Because the story wasn't just about her. It was about what came after. The school, the lawsuits, the media, the message, the warning, the legacy, and the question everyone asked. How did a teenage girl, humiliated and attacked by grown men in a school that was supposed to protect her, end up changing everything, not just for herself, but for an entire system? And who was her father really? What kind of man walks calmly into a place like that and turns silence into justice? What kind of power doesn't have to shout? And what did he do when the truth came out? Stay with us. Because this story isn't about revenge. It's about revelation. And once you hear what happened next, you'll never forget it. At Tales of Twist, we want to take a moment to speak directly to our Black viewers. We see you, we support you, and we stand with you. Racism in any form is something we do not tolerate or ignore. Today's story contains scenes that may feel painfully familiar, but we promise you, this tale is not about staying down. It's about rising, reclaiming, and turning pain into power. Stick with us till the end. You'll be glad you did. And hey, if you believe in stories that bring truth, justice, and twists that hit deep, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin. Her name was Amara, 14 years old. Tall for her age, quiet in a way that didn't mean shy. It meant intentional. Her words didn't spill out of her. They came like small, steady waves, pulling weight behind them. She had the kind of presence that made people look twice, not just because of how she looked, but because of how she held herself. There was a sharpness in her silence, a grace in the way she observed the world around her, like she was constantly reading between the lines of every room she entered. Her skin was a deep glowing brown. Her hair a beautiful, unapologetic halo of coiled defiance, framed a face that knew too much and yet hadn't stopped hoping. She was the kind of girl teachers described as wise beyond her years, but not always in a tone of admiration. Sometimes it came with a trace of discomfort, as if wisdom didn't belong in someone so young, or more precisely, in someone who looked like her. She was born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the West Side, far from the manicured suburbs and glittering private academies. Her neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was real. She knew the names of the corner store clerks, the dogs that barked at 5 a.m., the scent of hot oil and cornmeal coming from Mrs. Thompson's porch every Sunday. She loved her neighborhood, the noise, the laughter, the unspoken rules and rituals, and it loved her back. But when she was 12, everything changed. One morning, she came home from school to find her suitcase already packed. Her father had made a decision, without discussion, without warning. "We're leaving. Tonight." She didn't understand why at first. All she knew was that her mother had passed 2 years earlier, and her father, always a man of few words and steel nerves, had grown even quieter. He made calls late at night. Men in suits came to their house at strange hours. No one explained anything to her, just that she'd be transferring to a better school in a better part of town, because you deserve better. But better, it turned out, was a private institution tucked inside the old money edges of Charleston, a place with ivy on the walls, marble in the lobby, and eyes that looked at her like she was a misplaced puzzle piece. Charleston Academy was a world Amara wasn't prepared for, not academically, because she'd always been a top student, but socially, culturally. It was a place where legacy mattered more than merit, where her last name was met with curious silence, and her presence was tolerated more than welcomed. She wasn't the only black student, but she was the only one who came from where she came from. The others, a handful of polished, well-coached teens with perfect posture and parents on boards, didn't talk like her, didn't walk like her, didn't look like her, with the same fire in their eyes. Amara was different. She carried her neighborhood inside her. Her poetry, her thoughts, her voice, they all had roots. And roots made people uncomfortable. Still, she didn't bend. She walked those halls with headphones in, wrote poems in the back of her notebooks, and sat in the front of every class. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, people listened, even if they didn't want to admit it. Her English teacher once called her dangerously articulate. She smiled at that. There was power in being underestimated. Her father, on the other hand, was a mystery to everyone, including her. His name was Malik. At home, he was quiet, firm, and respectful. He made her breakfast when he was around, kept her out of trouble, and always made sure she had what she needed, but never explained where the money came from. Their apartment in Charleston was too nice for someone who claimed to consult for local businesses. There were always new suits in his closet. His phone never stopped buzzing. Men in black SUVs sometimes waited outside at night, but never stayed too long. She asked questions, but he deflected with vague reassurances. Just business, baby. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't absent. But he was unreachable. And Amara had learned not to push. Still, there was love between them, real love. It showed in the way he looked at her during breakfast. The way he straightened her backpack on her shoulder. The way he always kissed her forehead before she left for school and said, "Be sharp." She didn't know everything about him. But she knew this. Her father would burn down the world if anyone ever hurt her. Which is why what happened that day didn't make any sense. It was a Tuesday. The school was hosting a student showcase, something they did every semester, where students performed or presented something about heritage. Most of the kids came up with songs or PowerPoint slides. Amara, as always, chose to speak. Her poem, handwritten and folded in her pocket, was called The Pieces They Erased. She didn't shout it. She didn't perform it like a show. She just stood on the small stage in the school auditorium, under the cold glow of a single spotlight, and let the words flow. She spoke about textbooks that praised colonizers, about how schools taught her about presidents before teaching her about her people. She talked about her grandmother's stories, her mother's voice, the beauty of black hair, and the way white spaces pretended not to see. The room was silent when she finished. A tight, breathless silence. Then, some polite claps. Her teacher nodded with forced appreciation. A few students whispered. And in the corner of the auditorium, standing with crossed arms and unreadable expressions, were the men in gray uniforms. Not police, not school staff. Contractors supposedly hired for campus safety. No one ever spoke to them. They didn't carry badges. They didn't smile. They just watched. One of them, older, pale, with a cruel mouth and a scar down his jaw, stared at Amara like she'd spit in his food. He didn't blink, just whispered something to the man beside him. They didn't clap. They didn't move. They just left the room a moment later, without a word. Amara noticed, but she said nothing. The next 2 days passed quietly. She went to class, ate lunch alone, worked on her new poem. Nothing out of place, except the looks. The hallway seemed to carry a different kind of air. Teachers didn't make eye contact. Students whispered a little louder when she passed. And the men in uniforms? They watched her more closely, like she was a threat. Then came Thursday, the day that would change everything. That afternoon, the bell rang at 3:15. Most students poured out of the building toward the parking lot, laughing, talking, unaware. Amara had stayed behind, she always did, to clean up the poetry club's flyers in the gym hallway. It was quiet, too quiet. Her footsteps echoed as she moved down the corridor, alone. Her hands were full of papers, her mind on her next performance. She didn't see them until it was too late. The three of them stepped out from a side office, not quickly, not loudly, just enough to block both ends of the hallway. She stopped walking. Her heart kicked. She didn't understand. Then one of them spoke. "Got a second, sweetheart?" We need to talk about your poem." She froze. Another man, tall and broad with dead eyes, stepped closer. "See, some folks around here don't like being called erasers. Makes them feel attacked." Amara said nothing, just stared, tried to step back. But the third man was behind her now. She opened her mouth. No words came out. The man with the scar pulled something from his coat. The sound was unmistakable, the cold, mechanical buzz of clippers. "Relax," he said, smiling like it was funny. "We're just trimming some of that attitude." That was when her body moved on instinct, twisting, trying to run. But hands grabbed her arms, pinned her. She screamed. A hand clamped over her mouth. The clippers drew closer. And the only thing she could think, as the buzz grew louder, as she felt the sharp, cold metal graze her scalp, was why? Why were they doing this? And where was her father? The silence inside the car was heavy. Amara sat in the back seat, her hoodie pulled low, arms wrapped around her knees. Her scalp still ached, not from pain, but from the shame she couldn't shake. Malik sat beside her, eyes locked on the road ahead, but he wasn't really seeing it. The driver said nothing. The man in the passenger seat, one of Malik's lieutenants, had his fingers wrapped around a tablet, flicking through footage, names, records. They'd been driving for 20 minutes in complete silence when Malik finally spoke, his voice lower than usual, raspier. "Did anyone see it happen?" Amara didn't answer. Her mouth had been shut since they picked her up from a school office, where a nurse had offered her a blanket and avoided eye contact. Her father hadn't spoken a word when he arrived, just stared at the staff until someone stuttered out, "She's in the nurse's room," like they were reporting a fire. He hadn't touched her at first, just looked at her, at what they'd done, and something in his face shifted, like something ancient had been pulled from him, a version of himself he had tried hard to bury. Now, in the car, he repeated his question, softer this time. "Did anyone see?" She finally answered, her voice like broken glass. There were no students around, but they recorded it. With a phone. They laughed. Malik closed his eyes. A slow exhale. Then to his lieutenant, "Find the video." The man nodded, already working. Amara's voice broke again, raw now. "Why didn't anyone stop them?" Malik didn't answer. She turned her face toward the window, the city lights reflecting in her glassy eyes. "You told me this school was safe," she said, nearly whispering. "You said you checked everything." He didn't defend himself, didn't offer comfort, just looked ahead, quiet. She turned back to him, finally meeting his eyes. "You promised." "I know," he said. "But they touched me. They cut me. Like I was nothing." Malik's hand clenched slowly. Then he leaned forward, speaking to the front passenger without turning his head. "I want names, backgrounds, connections, everything. Start with the one who held the clippers." The man nodded again, tapping faster. "And the school." Malik's jaw tightened. "Let them sweat. We'll come back to them." They drove in silence again. But something had shifted in the air. Amara noticed it first. The route was unfamiliar. They weren't going home. The buildings grew older. Brick gave way to stone. Graffiti-covered warehouses lined the road. They passed an alley where two men stood smoking, who nodded subtly as the car rolled by. Amara sat up straighter. "Where are we going?" Malik didn't answer right away. Then he finally said, "To remind some people what happens when you forget who I am." They pulled into a long, narrow lot behind an abandoned textile mill. 3 other vehicles were already parked there, identical black SUVs. The doors opened almost in sync. Out stepped 6 men, all dressed in dark coats, no insignias, no flash. Amara had seen most of them before. Quiet men who always looked like they were waiting for something to go wrong. But one she didn't recognize, tall, older, salt and pepper beard, with a voice like gravel when he spoke. "She's the one." Malik gave a small nod. The man approached Amara slowly. Not threatening, not warm, just measured. "I'm sorry this happened to you," he said. "They made a mistake." Amara looked at her father, confused. Malik placed a hand on her shoulder, not gently, firmly, grounding her. Then he turned to the group. "The man's name is Gregory Rhodes, 32. contracted by a private firm to provide on-site security. But that's not all. Background's dirty. 2 sealed assault charges, 1 suspicious disappearance in Georgia that never stuck. Turns out his firm is a shell, connected to a larger network of consultants used to keep certain people in line. I'd seen the name before, didn't realize it was him. My mistake. The bearded man tilted his head. Want us to bring him in? Malik shook his head. No, that's not how this goes. Amara looked between them. What are you talking about? Her father looked her in the eye now, voice steady, slow. You remember when you asked what I really do? She nodded cautiously. I protect the people no one else protects. I make calls that other men won't make. I fix the kind of messes that can't be cleaned with apologies. Her breath caught in her chest. You hurt someone I love, he continued, and now I'm going to make sure every door that ever opened for that man slams shut. But how? She whispered. And for the first time that night, her father smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but with a kind of satisfaction that only came from knowing exactly what was about to happen. You're going to help me. He pulled a small tablet from his coat and handed it to her. On the screen, a video already cued. She hesitated, then pressed play. There it was. The hallway. The assault. The laughter. Her own body, frozen on screen. She flinched. Malik didn't. That video is going to the press, he said. But not for me. From you. Amara blinked. Me. They need to hear your voice. See your face. They need to feel what you felt. Because when they do, no PR team in the world will save him. She looked at the screen again. He'll be arrested? Malik turned to the older man, who nodded. He already is, he said. The charges are being processed now. Possession of an unlicensed weapon, aggravated assault of a minor, plus obstruction. Thanks to what we dug up tonight. He'll be arraigned in the morning. But that's just the start, Malik added. Because we also send his record to the Department of Education, the City Council, the school board, and every journalist in the Southeast who's ever written about systemic abuse in education. His face will be everywhere. His firm will collapse. His name will rot. Amara was silent, processing. Then finally, she looked up, voice trembling but fierce. Good. The older man gave her a respectful nod. Malik turned back to his daughter, his voice quieter now. You don't need to be loud to burn a system down. You just need to be precise. And as the others began preparing to move out, Malik stepped away for a brief moment to take a call. Amara stood alone in the cold lot, the tablet still glowing in her hand. She looked down at the screen one last time, at her face captured mid-sob on the worst day of her life, and hit send. And somewhere miles away, as a police cruiser pulled up in front of a quiet suburban house, Gregory Rhodes stepped out onto his porch, confused at the lights flashing across his lawn. By the time the cuffs were on, the video had already gone viral. And Amara? She hadn't even started yet. 3 weeks later, the city felt different. It wasn't quieter. If anything, the noise had grown, but there was a different kind of energy buzzing through its streets. Headlines still ran. Screens still flashed. But the story had changed. What began as a whispered injustice in a school hallway had exploded into a statewide reckoning. Investigations opened like floodgates. Parents demanded answers. Community leaders marched in front of news vans. The mayor held a press conference where he tried to distance himself from a scandal, but no one really listened to his rehearsed statements. People were focused on one thing, the girl who stood up and the machine that had tried to silence her. Amara's video had traveled faster than anyone predicted. It was reposted, translated, quoted. Celebrities commented. Activists shared it during panels. Teachers passed it around in classrooms. But the most powerful reactions came from the kids. Other black girls started sending her messages, photos of their natural hair, poems they had written, confessions about their own school experiences. They called her brave. But Amara never saw herself that way. She hadn't meant to become a symbol. She had just wanted it to stop. But sometimes the most powerful movements begin in silence and pain. She stood now on another stage, this time in a university auditorium. Not as a student, but as a guest speaker. Her curls had grown back just enough to frame her face again. She didn't hide them anymore. She wore them proud. The audience was full, students, professors, parents, all waiting. And when she stepped up to the podium, she didn't read a poem this time. She just spoke. Calmly, clearly. She told them the truth. Not just about what happened, but about what it means to live in a world that only protects you when you're useful. About how hard it is to be young and black and loud in a place that only values silence. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. And when she finished, the crowd didn't applaud politely. They stood. And they roared. As for Malik, he didn't attend the speech. He watched from a private room, far from the cameras. He was a man who lived in the shadows, but for the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. Not just pride, though that was there, heavy and undeniable, but release. He had spent a lifetime building walls to protect himself and his daughter. He operated in a world with no rules, no safety nets. But watching Amara take control of her own story reminded him of something he had forgotten. Sometimes, power is not in what you hold, but in what you pass on. Gregory Rhodes sat in a county jail just outside Atlanta, awaiting trial. The charges stacked higher by the week. New victims came forward, old files reopened. His private security license was revoked. His company folded. No firm would touch his name now. His face had become the cautionary tale on every news segment. The smirk he once wore so confidently in school hallways had vanished. His lawyers told him to stay quiet. But even silence couldn't save him now. The court date was set. The prosecution was building a strong case, not just with evidence, but with voices. Amara would testify, and the world would be watching. The school board scrambled to contain the fallout. Several administrators resigned for personal reasons. The headmaster took early retirement. Policies were rewritten. But it wasn't enough to erase what had happened. Amara's story had sparked change, yes, but more importantly, it had exposed the cracks in a system too many people trusted blindly. Parents began asking harder questions. Students demanded more transparency. And for the first time, the school began to look inward. Back at home, Amara and Malik found themselves learning each other again. The silence between them softened. She no longer asked what he did late at night. He no longer brushed off her questions. They didn't speak about it all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, they built something more honest. Malik taught her how to protect herself, not just with her words, but with her mind. And Amara taught him that strength wasn't about control. It was about letting go when it mattered most. The last time Amara stood in the hallway where everything happened, it was empty, cleaned, sterile. The cameras had been fixed. The floors had been waxed. But nothing could erase the memory. She stood there alone, touching the wall where her notebook had fallen, where her crown had been taken. And then, without warning, she smiled. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because it didn't own her anymore. She bent down and placed something on the floor, a single sheet of paper, folded in half. On it was written a new poem, just a few lines. A message. She didn't sign it. She didn't have to. The words were enough. Outside, she walked toward the car, waiting for her. Malik was in the driver's seat this time. No guards. No entourage. Just the two of them. "You ready?" he asked. She nodded, slipping her bag off her shoulder. "Always." They drove off as the sky turned gold behind them. Not into the sunset, but into something real. Something earned. And so her story didn't end with revenge. It ended with truth, with healing, with the quiet power of a girl who refused to be erased, and a father who finally let her lead. Now take a breath. Let that sit. Because stories like this aren't just fiction, they're reflections. They're mirrors. They're questions waiting for answers. How many Amaras do we ignore because their truth makes us uncomfortable? How many Maliks walk the line between shadow and protection, trying to hold the world together for their children? And when justice finally comes, will we be ready to stand in it or just applaud from a distance? Let us know in the comments how this story made you feel. Did it remind you of someone? Did it open your eyes to something real? We want to hear from you. And if stories like this move you, if you believe in narratives that twist the knife and still leave you whole, then make sure you're subscribed to Tales of Twist. There's more coming. So much more.